Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the slightly delayed start. YouTube wasn't particularly playing ball today, so sorry about that. But we have managed to get a YouTube stream going, and we are live on Facebook as well, so that's good. So thanks for joining. Now, today we have a very special guest, which is good because I'm losing my voice today, so we're going to let Zoe take the wheel today. So let's go and find Zoe. Hey Zoe, how's it going?
Hey David, I'm good, thank you.
Good, good. Thanks for joining us today. And what we're going to talk about today is essentially color grading with curves, which was definitely a well requested subject from the community. One which, I'll be completely honest, I'm not a complete expert on, so that's why we bring in the experts when necessary, which is Zoe. So let's go ahead and find your capture on screen. There we go. And I'll let you take it away. I'll keep an eye on the questions. So if you do have any questions on what Zoe is doing, please feel free to put them in the comments. And then we'll get to them as we go as well. So Zoe, I might pop up and interrupt you a few times as well. But first of all, if no one knows who you are the voice on some of our tutorial videos, I should explain. Hopefully you can help me out again in the future as well, because I'm going to need it, I think.
Yeah, I love doing them. They're really
Good.
fun.
And then you're
Okay,
based out in Berlin, correct?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
So,
and what kind of
sorry,
work
go ahead.
are you doing as well?
Yeah, I am a beauty and still life photographer. So lots of glitter, if possible. That's my dream shoot. Anything involving glitter, and cosmetic photography mainly in the still life area.
Fabulous. All right. Well, I shall let you take us away. So tell us about the shot and what you're going to do.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about this tutorial because I really love the curves tool. And I know for a lot of people it can be quite daunting. And it was daunting to me when I first encountered it as well. So I'm kind of really excited to hopefully simplify it a bit, because you really get full creative control when you use the curves. So this is a shot. It's a fashion shoot that I did. It's on location, and it's giving me this kind of 70s feeling, and with this location, especially in Berlin, this is a really kind of retro feeling. So I think I can do a lot with the color grading. So I thought this is going to be a good image to use. So before I do any color grading, I will just make sure that the image is correctly exposed, check for highlights being blown out. So I'm going to come over to my exposure area, and I'm just going to, I can see already up here we have some blown out highlights. So I'm going to just go down to the high dynamic range tool, and using my highlight slider, just recover those so really quickly. And I can also use my exposure warning button up here just to check. So if I want to recover all of that, I can take it down. So I always make sure no blown out details, make sure my shadows are lifted. I have all of the detail, and that's the great thing. Shooting raw, I can get all of that detail. And then exposure wise, I'm happy with that. I can just maybe increase the contrast a little, but I know with my curves tool, I can do a lot of the contrast work as well as the color work. And that's what I do love about the curves tool. So I'm not going to go crazy with the contrast slider, just a little bit on that. And then I'm just going to leave that. I'm going to go straight to the curves and see what I can do with this tool. So if anyone, is unsure about what the curves tool is all about, it's basically a representation, a tonal representation of the image. So if you're using an RGB image, so in Capture One, it's an RGB image. So we have this histogram on here, which looks kind of similar to this histogram up here. So down the bottom left of the curve, this is representing the darker areas of my image. And up at the top, it's representing the brighter areas of my image. And in the middle, the midtones. So we can see, using this kind of graph on here, there's actually a lot going on in the left side. So there's a lot of darker areas in my image, which makes sense when I look at the image. I have these lights that are really, really dark, almost black probably. And then there's not much really, really bright areas. Yeah, there's the light and her face, but actually it's not super, super bright. It's just a little bit down here. I can add a control point. I can actually, before I do that, let me just run through the different tabs. So we've got RGB, Luma, and then we have the colors split out into red, green, and blue. So if I go into the RGB, with this curve, I'm going to be able to affect the brightness of my image. So I can either add a control point and lift it, and we can see how that brightens the image, or I can pull this down and I'm darkening the image. And I'm putting this control point in the midtones, so I'm brightening my midtones and I'm darkening my midtones. So this is how I would look at if I wanted to add more light or remove more light. I can also add more contrast or remove contrast by adding a couple of other control points. So if I remove this control point by just dragging it off and add one at the top and then one here, we can create what's called an S curve. So that would be to lift up the brighter areas in my image and darken the darker bits of my image. And basically what that's doing is just adding more contrast, because contrast really is how light and dark areas are seen. So when you increase those values and get much brighter and much darker, it looks more contrasty. So we can do the opposite. We can remove contrast. If I pull up the darker areas of my image and pull down the brighter areas of my image, we start to flatten the image. So now I'm reducing the contrast. So the RGB, I love to go into that first. I have to be careful. It's going to affect both the contrast and the color. So I'm going to be having color shifts with this RGB curve. It's naturally, when you increase contrast, you also increase saturation. So our eyes are used to seeing that. When we see an image with more contrast, we want to see more saturation as well, because it's just what our eyes are used to. But I have to be aware of that. When I'm playing with the RGB curve, I am affecting the color as well. If I don't want to affect the color, if I pull off these control points, I have right next to it something called a Luma curve. So this is pretty much exactly like the RGB curve, but I don't affect the color. So if I start to lift this, I'm brightening it, but I'm not changing the hues, the saturation. I'm not changing any colors. And I can also darken it, and again, not affecting any colors. So this is also a great way to add contrast. So if I increase the brighter areas, and if I darken my darker areas, you can see no color shifts really happened. I've added more contrast, but I've changed no colors. So I love those two curves. There's no right or wrong here, just what works for the image. So if you don't want to get any color shifts, use the Luma curve. So yeah, so that's what I'm looking at for the beginning of my color grade. Do I want to add any contrast or not? So for this image, I kind of want to feel like it's more analog, like it's more 70s. So I think I'm actually just going to I'm gonna increase the brighter areas. I want this to still feel like it's got some pop to it, but I'm gonna make it feel a little bit more analog. So I'm gonna remove this control point as well. And I'm going to flatten it a little bit. So I'm going to just darken the midtones so it's not so bright. And so we can see that if I pull this end control point, it's affecting the really, really bright areas. So here was more of the brighter areas, but this point here is the very, very brightest. So if I pull this along, you see here where the really, really bright areas, they're now increased to almost, well, they probably are now, they're pure white. So if I put that exposure warning on, it's pure white now. There is no detail in that. But for an analog type photo, I'm actually okay with that. I don't need to be so careful about recovering details and getting all of that in, because actually for this kind of vibe I want it to feel a little bit more, yeah, blown out and brighter. So I'm going to maybe put that around there and somewhere around that. So now let's go on to the color grading. So we have these 3 different curves, red, green, and blue. So it's a similar kind of technique with the RGB and the Luma. I'll add a control point, and now when I pull this control point, I am affecting the red channel in my image. So if I pull up the control point, I'm adding more red into the image. If I pull down the control point, I'm actually removing red and the image is turning more cyan. So this is where kind of we have to feel a little bit more technical, which I know can freak people out. But at the beginning, what I would urge everyone to do, if you're not sure about what happens when I move this up or down, just have a Post-it next to your computer and write down red on one side, cyan on the other side. And when you do this again and again, it starts to lock into your brain, and you won't need to have any Post-its at some point. But just so you remember, if I lift up, I'm going to add red into the image. If I lift down, if I pull down, I'm going to add cyan to the image. So right now I'm doing.
So Zoe, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
How many Post-its do you have on your computer currently then?
So right now I've got no Post-its because I do this every day again and again and again. At the beginning, Post-its all over the place, and this is, for a lot of people, this is very, it's just not something that's intuitive. Color grading is the most difficult aspect of retouching. And it's something that some people can just have, this innate skill at, and others need to really, practice every day. Even the best color graders out there, it took them many, many years to get to that point. So you've got to use the little cheat tricks to help you, remember this stuff. So that's the red channel. So I'm going to pull that control point off. And if I go into the green channel, what is going to happen? I'm going to lift, add more green in there. And the opposite is magenta. So again, green, opposite side, magenta. And I'm only affecting the midtones. With the curves, I have the ability to add a control point anywhere on this line. So if I wanted to add more greens in the shadows, I'll come down to my lower left side of the curves, and I have the option of going to the really, really, the darkest areas, the blacks, and I could just lift this up. And now I just have this really cool green effect, only affecting the shadows. It's coming because I'm lifting this all the way up. You can see, obviously, it's going to be affecting a bit of the midtones, almost, up here to the highlights. So if I didn't want to affect the midtones, I would add another control point there, and I would just pull this down. So now this is pretty much now straight along that line. So nothing is affecting this area, the green channel on my image. I'm only affecting the shadows and lifting green, adding green into the shadows. So that's how that works, and it can work with the highlights as well. If I pull this down, I know that green is on one side and magenta is on the other side. So when I pull down this curve, I'm adding magenta into my brighter areas, into the highlights. And again, I could just not have that affect my midtones or my shadows, and just have it affect the top area, the brighter areas of the image. So you can see that here in the really bright areas of her skin and her hat, we have more magenta going on in there. I'm just going to press the little reset button just to get those control points all the way back. And then I'm going to go into the blue channel, and what we have is blue, and then I pull this down and we have yellow. So I'm going to, let's see, for this one, I could also, I'll leave a control point in the middle there, and let's try adding more yellow into the shadows. So if I pull this down, so you can see how this is more subtle here. So let's get rid of the control point. Let's just see. So now the yellow is it's really in the midtones area here, and it's almost coming up to the bright areas. So you can see how much control you have with color grading with this curves tool, and that's why I really love it. As well as affecting the color, I'm able to also affect the contrast. So it gives me full control, which I know can freak people out, but I promise you, if you do small adjustments and do a little every day, you will really it will feel more intuitive. So I think I've explained how the tool works. Are there any questions there, David, just before I go and do some color grading?
There's a couple of comments. Uva said a color wheel helps, alongside your post-it notes,
Yes.
which is good. I used to have I need to print them out again, actually. Before I redid the office, a couple of color wheels printed up, like complementary colors. What's actually going on the color wheel was actually really super helpful as well. So that's a good tip.
Absolutely.
Yeah, carry on.
Go for it.
No, go for it.
Yeah, the color wheels. I mean, the good thing about color is it's all been done before. So there is color theory, there are color palettes. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you're struggling to work out what your images should look like, you can go, I could see, okay, this image is more in the 70s retro feeling. Then I could go into Google and I could just Google fashion editorial 70s retro, and there will be hundreds of photos that give me what other people have spent hard hours work trying to work out. And I'll be able to see there's a vibe there, there's a feeling, and probably it's really warm colors and more reds in the shadows. And so I'll have a guide there. And I do this often. If I've got an editorial, I will have a mood board which will have color references. So I have a guide to go from. So I'm not just going, and you can absolutely do this, and I do still do this, where I just go like, okay, I'm just going to go in the reds and I'm just going to have a play and I'm going to pull this up and see what works. You can do that. And many of my photos do have that because I love playing with color. But I absolutely urge anyone who's not as sure about what they're trying to achieve, get references for you so you can make your life easier and speed up the process as well.
There was a little tip from one of our ambassadors, Maciek Miloch. When he's color grading, he uses the overlay tool in Capture One. He makes a little color palette, like you mentioned, inspiration, and then turns on the overlay tool to have it kind of floating. Just resize it, puts it in the corner of the image, and then it's on top of the shot at all times for reference. So that's quite nice. That's
a really cool idea. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that until just now. There was a question from Philip, which is a perfectly obvious question. Why not use the color balance tool? Which of course you can, but it's just different tools, similar end result. But I guess with the curve, you have a bit more choice about where you're placing your tints, like the shadows, midtones, and highlights you see here. They are predefined areas. Which we've set, which we feel work pretty well. But with the curves tool, if you want to put a tint into a tiny part of the shadows or a broader part of the shadows, I guess you could with the curves tool more accurately, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, here I can add color really easily, which is what I do love about the color balance. Having these wheels is very intuitive. I can just pull and quite quickly, and with color grading, you can get away with doing small changes and create a really beautiful effect. So you don't have to go wild with color grading, and that's why the color balance can make it much kind of quicker and easier to create an overall wash of color. Or what I would do sometimes is, if I just want to create maybe a few different looks to show a client, then I can go, okay, I'm going to go into my color balance and I will do some quick maneuvering with the tool, with the control points, and just see what works, what doesn't. Okay, there's one color grade, and then I can do another one. So it's super quick. It's not as controlled, which, like you said, it depends on what is the purpose, and that's where you decide which tool fits the purpose best.
Exactly.
So for the curves, because I can add control points all the way up here. If I want to just affect the highlights on her face and skin, so here, I can, if I make this, follow just here. I mean, I can go very, very finessed. I can just affect this area here. instead of adding, you know, a whole color wash over the image. So it really is just, you know, if you can see that, do a bit more extreme, you can really get, you know, finessed, and because I can also affect the contrast, which yes, on the color balance you have, you know, the highlights, so I can affect the brightness values of the image, but it's just not going to be as controlled as the curves. So
Got it.
I'm always wanting to get as much control as possible, you know,
But
so it does really help.
ever the control freak. Yep.
Yeah, I think most just tend to be, but I get why this tool can feel overwhelming for many. So I'm going to give you a tip for how to make it feel less overwhelming, or to make some, you know, to make a more subtle color grade. I always work with layers for color grades. I mean, I love to work with layers for most of the retouch because it just gives me again that control. So, you know, I will add a new layer, and I mean, I could even add a new layer for the color grade and another layer for the contrast. If I wanted to break it out to simple terms, maybe we do that. So maybe this one will be just for the color. So that means I would just affect the red, the green, and the blue. And then I will come and do another one, which I'll call contrast. So that is going to be only deciding on whether I want to use the RGB or the Luma. So for this image, let me zoom back out. I think another tip as well using the layers, if you're not 100% sure, you know, whether you want a really intense, or with the curves, because I can create such intense looks with very small tweaks. Oh, I haven't filled these, so I've got to fill the masks
Deliberate
because
mistake.
so you could have just gone here, new filled adjustment layer, but I didn't do that. So instead, because like these are empty layers, I'm now going to just right click and just fill this mask. So if I press M, I know that these are filled now. So because with the curves, doing small adjustments, small movements creates big changes that can also be quite overwhelming for someone. So a way to make it a bit easier, you can lower your opacity down. So, you know, I can lower this down to 40, 50%. And that way, if I, you know, actually let's even go lower, let's go like to 20. So now whatever I do, it's actually a lot more subtle. So I'm not so so I can still, you know, make bigger movements, but it's not going to be too intense. So that can really help you when you're still trying to, you know, work out how to use this curve tool and be so finessed with these small, tiny control points, which can be quite a lot as a beginner. So I'm going to pull that off. I'm going to start with the contrast. So I'm just going to go into my Luma. I don't want to affect the color because I want to keep this contrast layer as purely affecting contrast and no color shifts, no color changes. So that's why I'm going to be in that Luma curve. So I'm going to just darken the midtones and just kind of brighten my highlights a little bit as well. And that's it. That's all I'm going to do on that. I'm going to go to the color grade, and I know that I can switch between both at the end. So let's just see what I can do with the color now. So I want this to feel a bit more retro. So let's see. I think I want this to have a bit more warmth to it. I want the whole thing to feel warmer, more 70s. So I'm basically adding magenta when I'm in this green curve. It's green or magenta. So I'm going to warm up the image by pulling down the midtones just to warm everything up. And I want to affect the really bright areas as well. So I'm going to bring that down with this one. So you can see how now it's just giving a more of a red tint. So let me increase this so you can see what it's doing a bit clearer. Because the good thing with the layers, I can change this opacity. So if this is too strong, I can go back down and reduce it. So I'm going to keep this higher so you can all see what I'm doing a bit more clearly. And then at the end, I can reduce the opacity to make it more subtle. So let's do that for now. So let me do that with the contrast as well. Oh, the contrast is up to 100%. So that's good. So then let's see. I can either add more green into the shadows, but I actually want more red I want more magenta into the shadows. So that's why I'm playing with the really left control point. And you can see that it's just starting to add more red into those shadow areas. So I'm gonna try that for now. Then in the blue channel, I want this to be warmer again. So I don't want to be pulling this up because that's going to be adding blue. I want to warm this up. So I'm going to pull everything down again. So I'm going to pull the midtones down, and I'm going to pull down the highlights as well. So you can see there, I'm just adding more yellow into all of the highlights. And again, I want to bring more warmth into the shadow. So I'm going to be pulling this away and not increasing it. I'm going to be pulling it more across. So it's just adding more yellow into all of these darker areas. So let's see, we can really go. And what I love about shots like this is you can go quite crazy with the color grade. You know, you don't need to be so subtle, because if this is more of an analog feeling, then you can be a bit more heavy-handed. So yeah, so somewhere like this looks good to me. So I can always turn off the color grade layer. So let's see, so that's before and after, and with the contrast. So let's see, we pull down so from this point, I could decide, do I want to change the contrast that I tweaked at the beginning? I could make this a little bit flatter. I could make this not as contrasty. So I could lift up the shadows here. So we're just flattening out that tonal range. And let's just experiment. So I could keep it poppy by bringing the midtones up, or I can really kind of like dull everything down, flatten everything out. But I think like somewhere in the middle, I think is good. Just a little bit darker is good. So something like that looks good for me. And I can turn that off. So that's without the contrast. So it's subtle, but you get the vibe of it, and then with the color grade. And then obviously we've got the before and after tool, which I love. So there's before and there's after. And because this is an analog photo, I would definitely be adding some noise. So I'm going to go down to my film grain tool, and we can add, I'll zoom into 100% as well, so I can see this grain more clearly. And I'll go to let's try the tabular. So not too intense. So let's see, somewhere around there. And a little tip that I noticed that with the new dehaze tool, you can also, if you bring this down a little bit, it can also kind of give it a softer feeling, which can feel a bit more analog as well. Not so digital and perfect. So if I want this analog feel, sometimes I also play with the dehaze and just pull that down as well.
That's a nice tip. Haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, it's a quick, easy little hack I found. So, but I really like it.
Cool, nice one. Got a question from, where was it? Andrea Guglielmi, if I said that right, probably not. Sorry, Andrea. How do you approach color grading on beauty cosmetic close-ups? That's a little bit different, I guess.
It is, and this is where the difference between color grading and color correction, it's really important to understand the two. For beauty, I am much more focused on color correction. And color correction would be things like making sure the skin tone is all the same color and there's not, redness around the nose. Color grading for beauty photos, it would be very, very subtle, because ultimately I want the skin tone to be real. I want it to feel real. I want the makeup to be a true representation. If it was, say, for a client shoot who was, it was a lipstick we're using, it has to be the same color. But yeah, color grading can be, maybe I have 3 different colors on a beauty photo. I have an eyeshadow, a lipstick, and a blush. And color grading in that instance could be, how can we make these 3 colors more harmonious? Mm-hmm. So that would be looking at how can we use color theory to make those 3 colors a harmonious color palette. So it's not necessarily adding, say, lots of colors to shadows or highlights or midtones. It's more about balancing the colors that are in the photo to give a harmonious palette.
Excellent. And a question from Eric, which is basically saying there's lots of resources on color grading theory, So it says I've searched it, but every tutorial has a different version. So I guess color theory is subjective in some ways. What are some of your resources that you've looked to?
So I love, so I'm going to have to remember, it used to be called Peloton. Let me just check if it's still
Okay.
On this website. Or is it Color Adobe is another one. So there's, let me just bring it over actually from my other screen.
Cool.
So there's this which gives you the ability to look at these different color palettes.
Yeah, this is super cool.
There's another one. I'll have to think. There is one more which looks similar, but this one works great as well. But basically, I can choose, okay, this is a Triad color palette, and I can, move the control points. So, if I knew that I had, say, a lipstick it had to be red. I knew that the color of the lipstick had to be red, and I had two other colors in the image. Then what I would be doing is I'd be looking at probably a Triad color theory, and then I would be trying to balance the other two colors to fit. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not a perfect science when you're working with an image which has skin tone and maybe hair color. A lot of color theory is subjective in how you apply it, but you can definitely use color palettes, color harmonies as a guide. And often I will do this if I know that maybe that I want to have an analogous color palette, and I just want to use these three colors. So then I'll come into a tool like this and go, okay, I want it to be around these tones. So then I can go, okay, this is one, this is another, and this is another, and then I can screenshot this into my Photoshop. I'm trying to think. There's another. This tool visualizes this a little bit differently. So wait, I'm trying to work out where color schema. Let me just see. There's many different. Well, this helps me more. This helps me more. So then what I would do is I would screenshot this,
right,
put it into my Photoshop file, and then I could use that as more of a guide. Maybe it's the shadows would be this color, but maybe the highlights would be more of this pink color, and maybe the midtones would have a slight purple tint to them. So there is so many different ways you can apply the color, but at least if you are able to use a tool like this, or have a bit of a guide on, color palettes.
Yeah, what's harmonious.
Because that really color grading, really, or retouching is, how can you get your photo to feel balanced? And whether you do it in camera, which obviously is preferable for photographers, if you can choose the colors up front and okay, the model's going to wear this, they're going to wear, this makeup color, and I know this is a Triad color scheme, so it's going to have these three colors, and that works. And then the color grading or the color correcting is so much easier in the retouching, because you're just, okay, I'm just going to finesse these three colors. If you don't have that luxury, and especially as a retoucher, sometimes, you'll get images that have completely different colors in them. So you have to be able to, manipulate those colors to be a harmonious color palette. So this definitely is one of my favorites. And the other way would be just searching for, references. So like I would look at, there's some really big shoots. Like this is a big Gucci retouch, which everyone asks a lot about this, and having these images up. If I do a shoot in this kind of style, then I can go, okay, shadows, I know it's more blues, and that's okay, more blues, more magenta, skin tone really warm, and using that as a guide and having that up, using an eyedropper tool to select these different areas on the image and go, okay, in here we have cooler tones, in here we have warmer tones. And then I'll just be able to apply that to my image, which may look very different, but at least if it has a similar feeling, or it feels very like luxury, high end, and maybe this is what the client has wanted. Actually, here's an image, just looking at this. Someone has already tried to do a bit of hacking of like, what are the colors in this image? Right. So, there's definitely, you can get a lot by just having references up. and using those as your guide and your eyedropper tool, and just seeing what is, what someone else has done, and then, trying to apply that to your photos is absolutely fine.
Excellent. What a great answer. Eric says, thanks, great tool, Peloton. I've actually wrote that down on a notepad whilst you were checking. Everyone's testing me with names today. Sengazan, hopefully that's right, Sengazan. Looks similar to Adobe Cooler. I think that's the other one, isn't it? Yep. And Andrea says, yep, having a colour palette when planning the shoot is a good thing for me, definitely. So there we go. Nice. So there's all kinds of nerdy colour tools to get going on. So.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it never ends, And I can't. I'm not sure which. I swear they had something called Cooler, but there is a lot of kind of feelings of overwhelm when it comes to color grading for lots of beginners, and everyone who starts out retouching and editing photos can feel like that. And the Curves tool absolutely can be overwhelming at the beginning, but I think just those little tips of reducing down layers to really lower those intensities, that can really help. So here now I have something really, really subtle. If I do the before and after, it's really subtle. And just with a couple of different quicks of the control points, I can add a tiny little hint of a feeling that will complement. And really for color grading, I want to complement what's generally what's already there. This is a photo, has that analog retro feeling. So I want my color grade to feel like it matches and enhances that. I wouldn't ever go, now I'm going to cool down this image and make it feel completely different. You want to kind of always be looking to enhance what's there, really. Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. Well, sadly we are out of time, Zoe. But thank you for joining us today. Hang on, let's just put your handle up again. So Zoe Noble photo. And then also you have an education site as well, don't you, Zoe?
I do. Yeah, it's zoenoble.education.
Zoe Noble.
So there.
Hang on, I'm just typing it in. zoenoble.education.com.
No, it's .education.
Oh, just zoenoble.education. Oh, there we go. That's that's easy to remember then. zoenoble.education. No need to type that in as such then. Perfect. Exactly. And then you're adding to that as the weeks go by, is that correct?
Yeah, so right now I'm in the midst of getting out a photography and a retouching course. So right now the website, it has, you can sign up for my newsletter, which gives you lots of free tutorials and guidance already on either photography or on, color grading or retouching. And then, by the end of this year, there'll be a photography, a product and cosmetic photography and retouching course that will also go out there. So if you sign up for the newsletter, then you'll be first to know when that goes out.
Fantastic. Great. zoenoble.education. Simple. Great. Well, thanks for joining us today. Sorry for the shaky start on YouTubers, but I'm glad you found us in the end. So apologies for that. Always with technology, sometimes doesn't go your way. So there we go. But thanks again, Zoe, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks so much, David.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.